what is living? In the introduction part, we were discussing about a lot of diversity in the habitat of the living organisms, and one more thing that when different types of living organisms are present in one locality, sometimes same habitat may contain similar type of living organisms. So at that point of time, there is a possibility of conflict between the similar type of species and between different species of the living organisms. So that may be, the conflict may be related to the needs or the functions which are related, or dependency of that particular living organism on that particular environmental conditions. It may be for their survival or for the food or for any other aspect. Now here, as we already discussed that the living organisms have life and life form. So in this, what is living? So here, living is a process where there is an increase in the mass or change in the mass, change in the size, growth, reproduction, sense to the environment. That is what the responsiveness, or we can call it as a irritability, and self-replicating ability, cellular organization, metabolism. So likewise, if you take the characters related to a living aspect, so an organism which shows all these characteristic features, that organism is considered to be a living one. So here the living organisms will show, or we can say that from birth to the death of the living organism, we find a lot of change in the different characteristic features. It may be in the form of change in the size, change in the mass, growth, increase in the growth, process of reproduction, and sensing to the environment, that is showing response to the environment, that is by a irritability process, self-replication, and cellular organization, the metabolism. Likewise, these are the characteristic features based on which we can say that an organism is an living one. Here we have seen the characteristic features. Let us discuss the characters which have been already given in this one related to the living organisms. That is, first one is the growth. So growth is nothing but increase in the mass and size. So actually here, mass means the weight and the size. So both of them are considered to be the twin characteristic features, or twin characters, where irreversible change in the mass of an organism is called as a growth. But if it is coming to the size, generally the size of a living organism will go on increases from birth to the death. And in this process, when the size and mass, when we are considering, so here what happens means the new cells are added to the body of the organism. How does the new cells are added means? The new cells are added by a process called as a cell division. That is, the living organism, the cells which are present in the living organism have the ability of division, and those new cells which have been formed as a result of division will go and add to the organism, such that the mass of the body and also the size of the body will go on increases. So this is the way how the growth will be taking place in a living organism. And here in this aspect, so we can say that the plants will show both the primary growth and secondary growth. Actually, primary growth is exhibited primary growth is exhibited by almost all the living organisms, where the increase in size will occur in terms of their height or length, but only some of the plants like a dicot stem will exhibit the secondary growth, where there is an increase in the girth of the parts will takes place. So actually here we have to discuss only about the primary growth, because it is a common feature in almost all the living organisms, particularly in the plants and animals. And here when you talk about the primary growth in the plants, we know that meristematic cells are present in the plants. So here meristematic cells are those which have the ability of active division. So when they start dividing actively, so what happens means they grow and add the cells to the body of the organism. So that is a way how these meristematic cells are helping in the active division and adding the new cells, which lead to increase in the mass and the size. When the mass and the size will increases, ultimately we can say that growth is taking place in the living organism. And here, where are these meristematic cells are present? They may be in the form of apical meristems, or sometimes they may be in the form of intercalary meristems. Otherwise, we can call they may be primary meristems and some are secondary meristems also. But here we are concerned only with the primary meristems for the primary growth of the living organism. And one other special feature of the plants is the plant will show growth till the death of the organism, that is throughout its life it will show the growth. Okay. Whereas in animals, here the growth will take place in animals also. It is also by a process called as cell division. But how does the growth is differing in the plants from that of the animals? Actually in the animals, the growth will occur only up to certain time period. After that the growth will stops. That is the difference between the time period of growth which occurs in the animals and also in the plants. But despite of that difference, both the plants and animals will show growth by increasing in the number of cells. Okay. Then when it coming to the non-living organisms, in non-living organisms the growth is present, but it is addition of the substances on the outer surface. So the addition of the substances on the outer surface is called as accretion process. That is the change that we are observed. So here let us take the examples of mountains, sand moulds and boulders, etc. In all of them, there is a possibility of increase in the size. When you are saying that there is an increase in the size, there we can say that growth is taking place. But it is not the change which is taking place internally, but it is a process where the new substances are added on the outer surface. So whereas, okay, here now we can say that growth is present in both the living and the non-living organisms. But the difference is in the living organisms, the growth is internal. So what do you mean by internal growth means? Here, as we had already discussed, that the cells are added inside the body of the organisms but not on the outer surface. So here we can say that it is a process of intussusception, where the new cells are added on the inner side of the body. So that is the way the difference can be observed in the growth of the living organisms and the non-living organisms. That is, in the living organisms the growth will take place internally, whereas in the non-living organisms the growth will take place externally. Maybe both are showing the growth, but it is not by the same process. And one more thing, that when the growth is taking place, many such chemical reactions are also being observed inside the cells, but such type of changes are not present in the non-living organisms. Of course, as both of them are showing the growth, maybe internal or external, but we cannot say that it is the defining property of the living organisms. Next characteristic feature of the living organisms, or where we can differentiate them, is a reproduction process. Reproduction is a process where the progeny are produced, or in order to continue the race of that particular species, the living organisms or an organism have to perform the process called as a reproduction. So it is not a compulsory process, but it is required for the perpetuation, that is to produce the progeny. This process is very much required for an organism. And here let us start with the reproduction process related to the living organisms, whereas here we know that we already said that different types of living organisms are there, starting from the unicellular organisms to the multicellular organisms. So here all the living organisms will show different types of reproductive process. They may be differentiated into vegetative, asexual and the sexual methods of reproductions. Maybe that some organisms will exhibit one or two other type, or some may exhibit more than one type also. So likewise, depending upon their abilities and the potentialities and the organization and the nature, so they have been showing different types of reproductions by different types of living organisms. So here let us start with these two, where single parent is involved in the process of reproduction, whereas in the sexual process mostly it is biparental. Mostly, I am not saying that every time, but mostly it is biparental, that is two parents have to participate in the reproductive process. So when we are saying single parental, we can call it as a uniparental also. And here in the vegetative and the sexual process, whatever the characters that are observed in the parental, similar characters are coming to the progeny, whereas in the sexual process we can't expect exactly the same characters every time, but there is a possibility of the same characters which are coming to the progeny. Sometimes we can also observe the variations, that is the new characters may come into the progeny which may not be existing in the parents also. And let us start with some of the examples, like vegetative process. As we know that different methods of vegetative process are there, like fragmentation, that is the organism have been broken into small pieces or the fragments, and each fragment will gradually develop into a new individual. This type of characterization can be seen in some examples like Spirogyra, like algae, and some will participate by different methods of reproductions, like runners, stolons, suckers, bulb, likewise reproductive leaves. If you take like this, there are many such type of vegetative methods of reproductions which are present in the plants, and fragmentation is also being seen in planaria like organisms. Okay, then coming to the asexual process of reproduction. Here, as we discussed, that uniparental participation is there, and this occurs by some specialized structures called as spores, and these spores are generally haploid in their nature, and these spores may be sometimes multicellular, and in majority of the cases they will be unicellular, and these spores may be produced in special structures called as sporangia or sporangium, and these spores which are released from the sporangium, when they fall on the suitable substratum, they start germinating and giving rise to the new individuals. So this is a way how the spores are helping in the perpetuation of the generations or formation of the new progeny. And whatever the characteristic features which are present in the parent, the same type of characters are observed in the daughter generation also, because here a single parent is participating in the process. So let us take some of the examples like Rhizopus, Pteris, Mucor. These are some of the examples, like this is fungi. So this belongs to Pteridophyta, and this also belongs to fungi. In the same way, let us take some other examples like Funaria, which belongs to Bryophyta. Like different groups of plants will show the reproduction by asexual process by producing spores, and here different types of spores may be produced. Like let us take some of the types of spores here, like aplanospores, and some may be zoospores. Generally we say that aplanospores are the non-motile spores, whereas zoospores are considered to be the motile spores. In the same way, sporangiospores and chlamydospores, conidiospores. Likewise, if you go on discussing various types of spores are produced by different types of organisms which are helping in the perpetuation of the race or the generations and produce a new progeny. Now, the third type is a sexual method of reproduction. Here, as we say that it is biparental process where the two parents are participating to produce the progeny, and this progeny may exhibit the similar characters, or sometimes some variations are also been observed in the next generation or the daughter generation. And here sexual reproduction is observed in almost all the living organisms, starting from lower plants to the higher plants and lower animals to the higher animals. So this is a way how this process taking place by formation of special structures called as a gametes, which are generally haploid in their nature. And here we call the male gametes are produced from the male parent, and female gametes, that is egg cell, is produced from the female parent. Both of them will participate in a process called as a fertilization process, and they give rise to a structure called as a zygote. And zygote, which is a diploid one, and in some of the organisms zygote may undergo meiosis to produce a haploid body, but in higher ones or higher organisms the zygote will undergo mitosis to form into embryo. From there it will be converted into a diploid organism. So likewise the difference is there in the method of sexual reproduction. Based on that one, isogamous, anisogamous and the oogamous characteristics conditions are present. So that is a way how these living organisms are participating the reproduction, either it may be in the form of vegetative process, asexual process or the sexual process. But at the same time, can we say that all living organisms show the process of reproduction? Means it is definitely not. Why? Because there are some living organisms which does not exhibit the process of reproduction. So let us take some of the examples to deviate this character, how the living organisms are not exhibiting the process of reproduction. Examples such as sterile human couple. That is, there are some human couple, they are sterile, they can't give rise to the progeny. And the same way, the sterile honeybees are there, worker bees. In the same way, mule. So here the mule is produced by crossing the male donkey with a female horse. So the one which you are getting is called as mule, which is sterile in its nature, that is it can't participate in the reproduction. Such that there are some examples where we cannot say that every time the sexual reproduction is possible or the reproduction is possible in the living organisms. So these are the examples where the living organisms they cannot participate in the reproduction. In the non-living organisms, here when a mountain or a boulder is present, so that may break and convert into small pieces, that is breaking of the larger components into smaller components of a non-living matter. Here, there also what is happening, the number of individuals, number of the non-living matters are increasing. So, it is a external force which is applied on that non-living object, such that it will be converted into smaller fragments, but it is not considered to be the exact process of reproduction that we had considered in terms of the living organisms. So, when we consider the number, we can say that number is increasing in both the living and the non-living organisms because of the reproductive process. And at the same time, we already said that some living organisms does not produce the progeny or cannot produce a progeny by the process of reproduction. That's the reason why we can say that reproduction is not the defining property of the living organisms. Next characteristic feature is a cellular structure. Here the cells are made up of the protoplasmic content, which contains the vacuole, cytoplasm and the nucleus. So, here the protoplasm is present in the cells, and all these cells are composed or forming into a particular arrangement to form into a organization or the body. That is what we call it as the living matter. Every living matter is made up of cellular structure, and the cellular structure which contains the protoplasm. And here, when it is coming to the non-living organisms, so here cellular structure is not present in them or not existing in the non-living organisms. That is, non-living organisms are made up of some type of material or the matter, but those matter is not having the protoplasm in them. So, that is way how the non-living organisms are different or deviating from the living matter in the terms of cellular structure. So, here when we talk about the protoplasmic content, this protoplasmic contents contains the different types of cell organelles, and these cell organelles are helping in performing their own particular specific functions, that is helping in the other aspect that we have studied, that is the growth and the other metabolic changes that are taking place in the living organism. That is what we can say that cellular structure is one of the important characteristic feature that is present in the living organism, where the non-living organism is not having particular characteristic feature. Next characteristic feature is the metabolism. So, the living matter is made up of a cellular structure, that every cellular structure will contain a protoplasm, and that protoplasm will contain various types of cell organelles in them, and those cell organs will perform some functions. So, the functions in terms of the chemical reactions which are taking place inside the living matter, or we can say that the changes which occur in the chemicals, or we can say that the living organisms are made up of biomolecules like carbohydrates, polysaccharides, sugars, lipids, fatty acids, like different types of biomolecules are there, and whatever the biomolecules which are formed or which are present in the living matter, they will be interchanging. That is, one type of biomolecule is converted into other type of biomolecule. That interchanging or the reactions which are taking place, so that we call it as a metabolism, or we can say that the sum total of chemical reactions which occur inside a living matter is called as a metabolism. That is, the sum total of chemical reactions or the chemical changes which are taking place inside the cell is called as metabolism. In this process of metabolism, one type of organic compound is converted into other type of organic compound which that particular body or the living organism required for its functions. And other thing is these biomolecules will contain the energy. In the process of interconvertibility, the energy which is present inside the biomolecule will be released, which is useful for the activities which are performed by that particular living organism. Here in the metabolic aspect, so we know that we already said that in this process the energy will be released. Energy will be released, and this energy actually, which is in the form of a potential form, will be converted into kinetic form, that is a useful form of energy for performing various types of metabolic functions. And in this process, so we already discussed about growth, reproduction and other aspects related to the living organism. So if all that functions have to be performed by a living organism, means that it is dependent on the metabolism, because for growth, reproduction, responsiveness or for other activities they need some energy. So that energy is produced only when the metabolism is taking place. That means we can say that all other aspects, all other functions or all other characteristic features of a living organism are dependent on the metabolism. And here we can say that different types of metabolic aspects are there. Let us take the two categories of them. One is called as a anabolic process or anabolism, and the second one is called as catabolic process or the catabolism. So here let us explain this catabolism or anabolism by taking some examples, where here anabolism is considered to be the constructive process. So constructive process means from simpler substances they are converted into a complex substances, or that is simpler to the complex. That means here the simpler are converted into complex, so we call it as constructive process. Let us take the examples like the process of photosynthesis in the plants, where the simpler compounds like carbon dioxide and water are converted into carbohydrates. Here these two are the simpler compounds which are converted into a complex compound called as a carbohydrates. In the same way, the amino acids are forming into proteins, and in the same way the fatty acids are converted into lipids. Likewise, the monosaccharides are converted into polysaccharides. Likewise, in all of them, so simpler are converted into a complex one. That's why we call this as a anabolic process. Whenever a simpler converted into a complex structure, then only that will help in the building up of the cell or the cell wall or the organism. So that is the reason why the anabolism will help in the formation of the body of the living organism and also providing storage form of the energy. So other form of metabolism is a catabolism or catabolic process. So we can call it as a destructive process or breakdown of the materials. So this is a process where the complex substances are broken down to form into simpler substances. Here, whatever the energy that is present in the complex materials will be released when they are converted into simpler molecules. So we can call it as a exergonic process because the energy is released. That's why we call it as an exergonic process. The process where the carbohydrates, the complex biomolecules are converted into the simpler molecules like carbon dioxide and water. So this is a process where energy is released, and here this occurs during the process called as aerobic respiration. Whereas during anaerobic respiration, instead of carbon dioxide and water, the ethyl alcohol or lactic acid will be released. So in all this process, what is happening is the energy will be released, which is used in the other processes like seed germination, growth and development and reproduction, all other functions of an living organism. So this is a way how this catabolic and anabolic process are taking place. These are the part of the metabolism. And here during the process of this metabolic reactions, so it is not like that single reaction, single chemical reaction is not related with the other chemical reactions which are taking place inside the cell. But here there is an coordination which is there inside the body where the chemical reactions are taking place. That coordination will not lead to any type of cellular trafficking. That is, one reaction does not obstruct the process of other reaction. So cellular trafficking is not present during the process of metabolic reactions. So we can say that metabolism is exhibited only by the living organisms because the protoplasm and other cell organelles are present which are concerned with the metabolic changes or the metabolic reactions or the chemical reactions which are taking place in the cell. Whereas in the non-living organisms, there are no such protoplasmic content. That is the reason why they does not exhibit metabolism. So based on these characteristic features, we can say that metabolism is the defining property of the living organisms. Next characteristic feature is the sense to surroundings or environment, or we can call it as a responsiveness or consciousness. Generally, the living organisms are aware of their surroundings. The aware of the surroundings is called as a sense to the surroundings, and that means they start responding to the external stimuli. Like, let us take the examples of plants, where the plants will respond to the external stimulus like sunlight, gases, water, or other environmental changes. So this type of, that means according to that stimulus, they start reacting. So that that ability of reacting to the stimulus or showing response to the stimulus is called as a irritability. So let us take some example already that have been conducted by Charles Darwin and other scientists like F.W. Wendt, where the plants will show phototrophism and geotropism. That is, they show response to the light in terms of phototrophism. The same way the plants will show response to the gravity. So that is geotrophism. That is the way how they are responding and showing the growth. Then photoperiodism is also there. Photoperiodism is the duration of light. The duration of light will play important role in the growth and development of the plants. So that variation in the, that is we can say that some plants will show growth and development or flowering when the duration of light is less, whereas some will show flowering when the duration of light is more. That is they are responding in different manner to duration of light. That ability is called as a photoperiodism by the plants. So this is what the responsiveness which is exhibited by the plants to the external stimuli. And when it comes to the animals, definitely the animals also show response to the external stimulus. So that is the way how the living organisms are exhibiting sense to the surroundings. And at the same time we have to discuss about the non-living organisms, where they does not show any type of response to the stimulus. That is by themselves they cannot respond to the stimulus which is present external or which are present near their surroundings. So but at the same time we can say that so when it is coming to the persons who are present in coma, the living organism, the person who had met an accident and he is in coma. So if that person is there, he is living actually, but they does not show response to the surroundings. They does not show response to the surroundings. So here, when this is a condition, we can say that a living one who is in healthy condition, that person only can show the sense to the surroundings. Here when a person is in coma, his body parts are very well exhibiting the functions. Metabolism is taking place. As metabolism is taking place, but the only thing is they are not responding to the external stimuli. And when a dead person is there, of course, when a dead person is there, the body metabolism does not occur inside the body. At the same time, they does not show response also. This type of characters may be present in the persons who are in coma and the person who is dead. But when it comes to non-living organisms, the same thing, that they does not show any type of response. So here we can say that when a person or a organism is in living condition, so that person or the organism will show the process of sensing to the surroundings. And when you are talking about the living organisms like animals or human beings, they have self-consciousness. That is self-awareness is present. This self-awareness is not present in the plants, but this type of self-awareness along with the sensing to the surroundings is present in the animals like human beings. Next one is the interactions. So here when you talk about the cell, the interactions in a cell are very much there that we had discussed in terms of the changes which occur in the biomolecules. Here when you talk about the tissue, here the tissue does not, we can say that the properties of the tissues are not present in the cellular constituents, but it is due to the interactions of the cellular constituents. In the same way, when it is coming to the cellular organelles, so in that also the characteristic features are not present in the molecular constituents, but it is due to the interactions between the molecular constituents which are present in the cell. That is, in the tissue and also in the cellular organization, the interactions are taking place inside the cell or the tissue or the body where the chemical reactions are taking place in terms of the metabolism. So here the interactions are present in some biomolecular structures like starch. Like as the complexity of the organism is going on increasing, so the interactions are very much being established in those complex organisms where the one type of compound will be converted into the other type of compound. So that is the way how the interactions are also playing very much important role in the organization where it is not present in the non-living organisms. Because why we are saying that interactions are not present in the non-living organisms means because they should have at least a cellular organization or the tissue organization. It is not possible to have the interactions in the non-living organisms because they does not have neither the cellular organization or the tissue organization, which is considered to be the one of the defining property related to the living organisms. Next one, adaptations. Here, if a living organism is present in a particular area or if it have been shifted to a new locality, so the plant or the animal or the living organism have to adjust to that changes which occur in the surroundings. This ability to adjust to the new locality or the change which have been occurred in the environment is called as adaptations. So these adaptations may be sometimes short-term adaptations or sometimes they may be long-term adaptations, or that is short-term adaptations or the long-term adaptations depending upon the changes which occur in the environment. But here the way of adjustment of the living organism to the changed environment is called as adaptations, which is not been observed in the non-living organisms. That is the way how this, let us take some examples like the cactus group of plants are there which got adjusted to the high temperatures and the desert or the drought conditions. So that is a long-term adaptations which have been exhibited by them. Or in some of the plants the modifications can be seen in the either in the root or the stem. So that means they show such type of changes according to the need and the functions. So that type of changes which occur either it may be because of the internal changes or because of the external factors. That type of changes or a change in the structure and shape and form is called as adaptations, which is not been exhibited by the non-living organisms. Next, self-replicate. That is what here the ability of doubling that nature is called self-replicate. So here this is an autonomous process where the genetic material should be present. Like let us take the DNA, which is a genetic material where it can double the number and which will control the functions related to that particular organism. So here this type of self-replicating nature will be there only when the cellular structure, the nucleus or the functional aspects or metabolism is very much present in that particular organism. But when it is coming to the non-living organism, so it does not have the cellular structure, so we can't expect that to have the genetic material in them. So that is a way how the non-living organisms can't perform the self-replicating ability, whereas only the living organisms will have this property. So we can say that self-replicating ability is a unique or defining property related to the living organisms. Likewise, Till now we have seen some of the characteristic features which are present in living organisms and some characteristic features which are present both in the living and the non-living organisms. Based on these the properties which are exhibited by both inanimate and the animate matter, we had considered some of the characters as the unique characters or the defining properties of the living organism, where that particular character is not exhibited by the non-living organism, such that metabolism, consciousness, interactions, self-replicating ability, metabolism. So these are some of the characteristic features which are exhibited only by the living organisms. So this is the way how living organism is deviating from the non-living organism. That is, whenever a organism is exhibiting those properties, then we can say that that is a living. That is what living means.